Welcome to today's licensing subcommittee meeting. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live, and these recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premise must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collating personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed, and once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use the microphone when speaking. Right. Do you want to start the meeting?
Good morning, welcome to the meeting of the Licensing Subcommittee.
Members, do you have your agenda packs in front of you for the matter under consideration today? Now I will now present the report.
Do you want to?
Oh, and may I ask members who we wish to appoint as the chair?
Yes.
Move Lucy Hodgson as chair.
And,
Seconded.
and do we have any declarations of interest?
I've been approached by, apologies, I've been approached by several members of my community in Arboretum about the issues regarding the racecourse in general. A major problem with drone activity every time there's a race day, and they also have other issues. Some people about animal welfare, and I know that was raised at P&R last night, and gambling issues and addiction issues. So just to let you know that I have been approached on these matters. I don't believe from the papers it will be relevant to this meeting, but it is important you're aware of it.
Okay. Presentations to this subcommittee are not given under oath. However, I should like to remind all parties that the highest standard is expected, and any deviations from these high standards could possibly influence any decisions of the subcommittee. So first of all, I'd like to identify all people's present. So I'll start with Jenny.
Jenny Barnes, Councillor Arboretum.
Councillor Lucy Hodgson, Councillor for Warden Villages South.
Richard Udall, Councillor for St John's.
Georgina Coley, Legal Advisor.
Alex Beard, Community Engagement Team, Worcester City Council.
Nikki Jones, Licensing Officer, Worcestershire Regulatory Services.
Niall McMenamin, Principal Officer Licensing. I'll be presenting the report on behalf of the Council today.
I'm not sure. I'll read it, but obviously the applicant, they can be represented by a legal representation, but I think it's not pertinent in this case because, and Georgina is, so that's fine. And when presenting, all parties are limited to a maximum of about 10 minutes in which to make representations to the subcommittee. This period may be extended at the discretion of the chairman. So we go on to the so do you want to?
Yes, the Principal Officer will now present the report to committee.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair, members. Yes, if you'd like to turn to page 1, agenda item number 3. This is an application for the grant of a premises licence for Pitchcroft Racecourse, and this is the public area. So this application is not being made by Arena Leisure, and there is no connection with the racecourse itself. The purpose of today's report is to consider an application for the grant of a premises licence in respect of Pitchcroft Racecourse. A bit of background to assist members is that on the 8th of June, an application was received by the City Council for the grant of a premises licence in respect of Pitchcroft Racecourse. The application contained all of the prerequisite documents, including the fee and the plan of the premises, which is included in your report pack. It can be confirmed that the application was advertised in accordance with the requirements of the Licensing Act and associated regulations, and that the application has also been served on all of the responsible authorities. So a copy of the application form is attached to the report papers at Appendix 1. So at Appendix 1 on page 5, you will see a full copy of the application form. And if I just take a few moments just to go through the application, you will see that it's being made by the City Council. So this is a City Council application. And in the application, they are applying for regulated entertainment, the sale of alcohol, late night refreshment. So all of the details are contained within that application. There is no further documentation that the council have. On page 21, we refer to this as the operating schedule, and a number of conditions have been put forward by the council on how they will control and maintain and uphold the licensing objectives, and I'll come on to explain the licensing objectives in a moment. So all of the information is contained within the report and the application. So if we go back to the report, you will see the applicant is applying for the following licensable activities. So this is anything of a similar description. They're sort of mixed around. So I'm going to change the order of these so that they make sense. First of all, it's regulated entertainment, and that will include dance, films, live music, performance of plays, recorded music, and anything of a similar description. Generally, the application is for every day between the hours of 9 a.m. and 11:30 p.m. There is also the sale of alcohol, which is again 9 a.m. until 11:30 p.m. The designated premises supervisor is identified by Mr. Mark Bayliss, who works for the Community Services team at Worcester City Council. Just by way of a bit of background and to assist members, office records do confirm that the premises licence has been held by the City Council for Pitchcroft for the public area since 2008. When we were looking at premises licences held by the City Council, myself and the Community Services Manager did an audit of all of the licences held, and it was identified at that stage that the licence for Pitchcroft appeared to have what's called a superseded status on our system. This means that further activity has taken place. However, there is no record of any further activity taking place, so the licence appears for all purposes that it's actually at that point been superseded. Now, a discussion took place as to what we do with the licence. It could have been that the council themselves just changed the licence back to issued because no further action had been taken, the licence hadn't been surrendered, it hadn't been suspended. So it really was a decision, you know, what should the council do with this licence? Now, of course, between myself and the Community Services Manager, the decision was made that a new licence should be applied for. We are the council, we should be above reproach, so there should be no suggestion that anything untoward has taken place. So for that purposes, my advice to the Community Service Manager was apply for a new licence. And that is the reason why there is an application before you today. It is a new premises licence, albeit a mirror application, so an identical application to the licence that was held previously. As part of the application, And in response to the public notices, the council received, or rather the council didn't receive any representations from the responsible authorities. The responsible authorities are the police, environmental health, health and safety, planning, and so on. But in response to the public notices, the council did receive 2 letters of representation, one objecting to the premises licence and one offering suggestions on how the licence should be altered. So whilst the second representation wasn't actually objecting to the licence, they were putting forward sort of recommendations that should be considered. And those are attached at Appendix 3. And as the objectors aren't here today, it's probably best that I go through those objections, just so that I can highlight the relevant bits. I'm just scrolling frantically through my papers. Just so that you're aware, the representations express concerns in relation to increased levels of noise, citing that the grant of a premises licence would undermine the licensing objectives of public nuisance. It's Appendix 4. The appendix numbers appear to have just been a bit. In reality, the application and the plan are Appendix 1. The premises licence previously is Appendix 2, and the representations are Appendix 3, but it's listed as Appendix 4 in your papers. So, as mentioned, on page 33, oh, thank you. We have a representation from a Mr. Warren. He has raised concerns. He lives in the vicinity of Pitchcroft, and he has raised concerns. He states that he does not object to the application for Pitchcroft, but is concerned about the noise factor, and believes that permission to be granted should be subject to the following: that the premises must be fully soundproofed so that no noise from music and any other live music can be heard outside of the premises. There should be a decibel restriction of the sound levels within the premises. He then goes on to express concerns about other types of entertainment, fun fairs and the like. Second objection is from a Ms. Gant, again who lives in the vicinity of Pitchcroft, who cites that they already suffer from noise or loud music from the rowing club on occasion, so events held at the rowing club. And the granting of a music licence for the racecourse up to 11:30 would cause huge noise nuisance for those living both sides of the river. And then she states that sound carries across quite easily, and that she strongly objects to the proposal. If a licence were to be granted, it should be for a strictly limited number of special occasions, should not be allowed past 10 p.m. So those are the 2 representations that you have. I'm aware that since the article has been published in the Worcester News, there have been further correspondence received by the licensing office. Unfortunately, the point for representations had passed, so they can't be included today. But there are other residents concerned about noise. The plan of the premises shows the area which is to be licensed. So when you look at page 25, you will see the exact area, which is in pink, which is to be licensed. This is the public area, as I mentioned earlier. There is no connection with the grandstand itself or the private area, which is Worcester Racecourse. So it's merely owned, it's land that's owned by the City Council, I believe. So, members, when we consider local policy considerations, the subcommittee should have regard to the Council's statement of licensing policy, and you'll all be familiar with the statement of licensing policy, which is available on the City Council's website. And the legal implications, I'll just highlight them to you. You are obliged to determine this application with a view to promoting the licensing objectives, and I've mentioned them earlier. These are the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, the prevention of public nuisance and the protection of children from harm. with regards to this application, you are focusing on the prevention of public nuisance objective only, because that is what's been cited in the representations. So when making a decision, you're obliged to have regard to the Secretary of State's guidance, which is issued under section 182 of the Licensing Act. When making your determination, you can take one of the following steps. So this is what you're asked to do today. You can grant the licence as applied for, so having heard of all of the evidence which you have and heard from the applicant themselves, you can grant the licence as it's been applied for. You can modify the conditions of the licence by adding to them, altering them, or omitting them. So you can add conditions, suitable conditions which you feel appropriate to address any concerns that have been raised, or you can amend hours or times, or you can reject the application in whole or part. You must note, however, that you can't simply modify the conditions or reject whole or part of the application just because you feel it desirable to do so. It must be in relation to upholding the licensing objectives. At the end of the hearing, all parties will have a copy of the decision notice, which will be forwarded to the applicant and also the objectors. Again, all parties have a right of appeal to the magistrates' courts on the decision that's made today. Again, that's the objectors and also the applicants. So, members, you're asked today to consider and determine the application for Pitchcroft Racecourse. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Richard?
Yeah, a few questions, if I may, Niall. The application is for 12 days a year, is that correct?
That's correct.
And are those 12, is that year to be measured as a calendar year or from the date of any grant of a licence?
We would take that as a calendar year. So the 12 events aren't planned. It's making them available should events be planned throughout the year. So it may be that less events take place, but it's just giving the council an opportunity to arrange events up to 12 times. Okay.
And can I ask whether those events include race days or are in addition to race days?
Unfortunately, I can't answer that. Maybe a better question for the applicant.
Okay, fair enough. Can I ask you about the number of people which would be adequate for attendance at such a space?
So in the application, they have indicated or highlighted, you'll see on one of the pages, that they are having up to 12,000 people at events. So that is the maximum permitted number of people that can attend any one event. When we talk about events, we're talking about licensable activities under the licence. There are other events that take place, as mentioned earlier, fun fairs. They are not licensable activities and they will not form part of this licence.
And how was that 12,000 people being calculated? Was that done by yourself or by the applicant?
It would be done by the applicant. It's normally, when we're talking about events, it will be ticketed. Ticketed events only. Sorry, no. I'll probably put words into the mouth of the applicant there, but certainly the events that are planned are ticketed.
Okay. And has any consideration been made about the public nuisance towards the river, which is adjacent to the application site?
Yes, I mean, all considerations have been made. Certainly when I spoke to the community services manager, he's working very closely with any entertainment providers to ensure that events do not cause noise nuisance to local neighbours. Where there are large events, they will be notifying all residents within the vicinity to make sure that they are aware of the event. And the council takes its responsibility seriously, and I'm sure Mr. Booth will mention or give you an indication of how they will deal with any complaints or any inquiries that come to the council in relation to events.
Thank you, Chair.
Jenny?
Nothing at present.
Do you have any questions?
No, thank you, Chair.
And does the applicant have any questions?
No questions for Niall.
Right. Okay. So we now go. So the applicant, can you speak on your application?
Yeah, good morning. as stated, I'm Alex Booth, Community Engagement Team Supervisor for Worcester City Council. I'm covering Warwick today, so apologies for that. The reason I'm here today is to apply for premises licence for Pitchcroft, as Niall's already expertly covered. Just in terms of background for who I am and in terms of the team and what we do at the City Council. We work with volunteer groups and organisations across the city, but also part of our role is to administer events that take place on public open space. Obviously, this premise licence relates to public open space of Pitchcroft, and predominantly our interest in that is in terms of events that take place on that land. There's many events that take place over the year in terms of small-scale events, ranging up to sort of larger-scale events. In terms of our involvement in how we administer and process those, an applicant would go onto the events portal and make an event application, and then that comes through on the back office to the team, and there's a set process by which every event would go through, and that's from really small scale events such as litter picks and community events, all the way up to sort of the bigger events, for example, Tom Jones or the Worcester Show. So there's different steps within that application process, and each step kind of corresponds with the scale and complexity of the event. If it's a complex event with licensing, which is obviously the purpose of me being here today, that event application would be scrutinised quite closely. We'd meet with the applicant on site, we'd go through any kind of concerns, we'd make sure that all regulations are complied with and that the event organiser is a trustworthy and an organised event organiser. So that's kind of the background of how community engagement team administer all the events. In terms of the scale of events that the community engagement team deals with, in Q1 we processed and administered 156 events. So it's something that we do all the time. It's a major part of our role. It's not just a sideline. It's a major part of the role. So that gives some kind of background on why I'm here today. In terms of the application itself, obviously Niall's covered it really well. I've been made aware of 2 objections which the team manager Warwick Neil communicated with and did attempt to mediate with the objectors, gave some background information and also further kind of guidance about other steps to take if there are concerns about noise, especially in relation to other areas of Pitchcroft not included within this premise licence application. We definitely take those on board. We don't kind of shy away from that. It's in our interests to look after this green space. It's a fantastic event space, and we care for it and the people that live around it. So it is very important to us. As I've already kind of mentioned, there are many event controls that go in place when an event application like this would come in. So part of that is obviously the noise that's generated, and there's all kinds of guidance and industry standard code of practice around that. So that's kind of covered by that. We make sure everybody adheres to that. Obviously, in terms of the green space, as I've mentioned, it's really great green space, and the advantage for us of having it close to the city centre is that it's attractive to certain commercial activity and events, and that is obviously of great interest to us and from the community side as well. And I should also say that should the licence be granted today, ongoing monitoring, it forms part of the event application process, and also I believe there's a process, obviously Niall will probably correct me on this, but I believe there's a process where it can be reviewed anyway. So that's kind of who I am, why I'm here, how this application's been handled, and I'm happy to take any further questions.
I've got one question. Recently, after a race meeting, there was a concert by James Bay? Is that the sort of thing that you would license this for? Because it was in the area where this license is going to be
Yeah.
held.
My understanding is that James Bay was actually put on by the racecourse, and it was on racecourse controlled land as opposed to the public land.
Okay.
That's certainly my understanding of that particular event. There are similarities of some of the event usage of that nature, and we've got Tom Jones on the 13th of August, which is, you know, quite a rarity, but that is similar.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. No.
Chairman, if I may, I had a conversation with the environmental health team in relation to events held on the racecourse, and we have confirmed that actually the concert you're referring to was on the licensed area, which is the racecourse held by Arena Leisure. There's some hard standing on the opposite side of the grandstand, which, if you look at the map, it falls just to the south of the pink area, and that is where they tend to hold their sort of concert venues, I believe.
Okay. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Booth. Can you confirm that any events which you would be holding, any licensed events which you would be holding on this site, would be ticket only?
Tom Jones is ticket only. Worcester Show is not ticketed, obviously, but it's an open site, so that's a licensable activity that's not ticketed. That's the only one that I'm aware of.
So it wouldn't, as suggested earlier, be events which would be ticket-only events. It could be open to all to enter some of these events.
As far as I'm aware, that's the only one that's not ticketed. I'm just looking at the sheet.
Can you tell us what events you have planned for the area in the forthcoming months?
In terms of licensable activity to the end of the year, we have Tom Jones, Worcester Show, and Fake Festival, which are all in August.
What festival, sorry?
Fake Festival.
So these extra 12 days would be in addition to race days, not part of them.
I believe that's correct, in addition to race days.
Okay. So why have you asked for 12 days in particular?
Purely because that was what was on the pre-existing license.
And I assume that applies for the 11:30 termination time as well.
That's exactly the same as it was, yeah. I probably should just emphasise that the application is exactly the same as it previously was, and it's purely administrative, really.
Any consideration been taken about disturbance which may affect water safety on the adjacent River Severn?
I'm not entirely sure on that, actually. I mean, we work with partners such as Royal Life Saving Society and people in community safety. Yeah.
If the number of days was reduced from 12 or increased from 12, would that affect your business plan, or would you be comfortable with any restrictions such as that, which could be conditioned?
We don't hold 12 events on this site. It's just that is what was on the previous existing application. We don't have a plan to increase or decrease the event applications that come in. It's not something that we proactively seek. It's just the applications that naturally come in.
And do you have any policy about events which take place, or intend to have any policy about events which take place which could cause a nuisance, such as drone use?
I'm not aware of any policy that covers that from the City Council.
Yes, first of all, obviously on race days, the whole of Pitchcroft is closed to residents. Would any of the events that you've mentioned lead to the closing of Pitchcroft in a similar way?
Yes, I believe so. I believe that's covered in the lease agreement with the racecourse.
Right, so obviously not the Worcester show because that's open to everybody, but the other two events that you've mentioned would close off the Pitchcroft.
Yeah, there's a certain number of event days in addition to racecourse days that I believe racecourse can be closed to the public. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it would appear to match the number of licensable days, I suppose. That would make sense.
With that in mind, how much income do we make out of those days?
I don't have that information to hand, unfortunately. I can certainly find out.
Obviously, it's more important in lots of respects is how it's then spent for the good of the community, but it would be useful to know how much income we make out of those events. And finally, the objections. Obviously, the premises being discussed as a field, effectively. So there can be no soundproofing, although I'm sure baffles could be put up to some degree. What decibel restriction are you putting on the bands?
As far as I'm aware, guidance states that it should not exceed 75 decibels over a 15-minute period. We have worked really hard over the last few years in terms of the larger scale events to take mitigating action to make sure that it's not a problem for residents. This includes attendance from sound specialists and engineers to make sure that the sound is focused in the correct direction and that the volume doesn't exceed the recommended levels. And also following up any comments or issues. I'm aware of one over the last 12 months where there was an athletics event that took place and some of the speakers were pointed in the not ideal direction. That was then followed up and corrected, and that was with the racecourse as well.
And finally, it's suggested by one of the objectors that there should be no noise after 10 o'clock. How reasonable would that be for our bookings? No, you suggested 11:30, or you've applied for 11:30, and most events are considered a nuisance if they go on beyond 11 in communities. What is your comment about a suggestion about a 10 o'clock deadline?
Obviously that would limit commercial activity, but having said that, we don't have a huge number of late night licensable events anyway. It is very minimal on terms of the public space, but having reduced time would potentially affect commercial activity. But you know, as I say, we really don't have many late night activities on Pitchcroft anyway.
Okay, and are you aware what the racecourse arena leisure evening activities are and how long they go on to?
Yes, we have quarterly meetings with the MD of the racecourse, and we kind of keep up to date in terms of planned activities on the site. We have reasonably good relations with them, so we can raise any concerns or suggestions before they arise.
Thank you.
Referring back to the 11:30 termination time again, that is the termination of activity which is licensable, but obviously activity will take place after 11:30 p.m. in clearing the site and tidying up, etc. Can you confirm what time the site would be clear of people?
That's probably difficult to say. I'd say there's only an exception this year in terms of the Tom Jones event that would run over, clear up past that time. Obviously the activity will have concluded before 11:30, but in terms of site infrastructure or any changes, I'm not entirely sure what time that would finish.
What time is the Tom Jones concert due to finish?
10:15, I believe.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No questions.
I don't have any questions. Does the licensed officer wish to make his closing statement?
Thank you, Chair, members. Yes, so we are here today, or rather you are here today, to determine an application for a premises licence which has been made by the City Council to the City Council for a premises licence on Pitchcroft. You've now had the opportunity to hear from myself in relation to the application. You've also had the opportunity to hear from the applicant in relation to how events are going to be controlled and managed. You're aware of the objections that have been received and the concerns that have been raised in them as they have been read out. So you are fully aware of the concerns that have been made. When considering this matter, you must relate any decision you make back to the licensing objectives, and I mentioned earlier, the relevant licensing objective today is the prevention of crime and disorder. Sorry, it isn't crime and disorder at all. It is public nuisance. Sorry. Sorry about that. I've lost my flow now. Yes, so the legal implications were contained in your report, and I don't propose to go through them again. What I would say is, when considering this matter, take into account the operating schedule at page 21, where all of the voluntary conditions which have been put forward by the council are contained, and bear in mind that this is an application to put the council back in a position where it was previously in relation to a previous licence which was granted. So members, you're asked today to consider the application for the premises licence for Pitchcroft. Thank you.
No further comments, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, members, it's to you to consider the application and determine it on all the evidence in front of you. There is a presumption in favour of granting a licence unless we consider that the licensing's objectives can't be satisfied or can't be satisfied by adding conditions. You need to determine whether to grant the application as it is, to modify the conditions, or to refuse the application. And as I said, you do that based on the evidence in front of you. My advice to you is that you consider the two objections that you've received, which, as the licensing officer said, relate to the prevention of public nuisance licensing objective. You are required to determine what weight you wish to give to those objections and consider whether there is evidence that is sufficient for you to require there to be conditions, or whether there is evidence that suggests to you that the licensing objective would not be satisfied. I would say that simply because the objector has not attended in person does not mean in any way that you disregard the objection or give it any less weight, and it has been read out to you today. Is there anything else you'd like from me, Chair?
We are going to grant the application as applied for, but subject to one modification to the finishing times of the licensing activities from 11:30 to 11 p.m. So, I'd like to just, Georgina.
Thank you, Chair. All parties to the hearing will be notified of the committee's decision in writing within 7 working days, and any party aggrieved by the decision may appeal against that decision to the Magistrates' Court within 21 days of receipt of the written notification. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much.